VA as an intern and ended up staying in the VA for my postdoctoral fellowship, and then was fortunate enough to get hired, and off I went. So today what we're going to do is cover an agenda that I hope will give you what you need to know about getting a VA internship. We're going to talk about VA culture and variability between hospital settings and different training programs. We're going to talk about what's unique within the VAs in terms of internship training programs, cover some diversity, as well as very practical application and interview tips. But before I get started, I'd like to introduce you to my amazing colleagues. We've got Dr. Joanna McCormick joining us and Dr. Micol Levi-Menzi. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Joanna, to introduce yourself, and then Micol can jump in and I'll get started.
Great. So I'm Joanna McCormick and I'm at Montana VA. And my particular VA spans the whole entire state. And I was not a product of an internship through the VA system. So I became a training director of Montana VA when we created the training program, and that hadn't existed here in Montana. So I've had some unique experiences in building a program and getting to see what we offer. And as they often say, if you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA. So every VA training program can look pretty different, but we often share a lot of similarities across each other as a training program, which is interesting too. Micol.
Good morning. Although I think it's afternoon for a lot of you guys. I'm on the West Coast, so it's morning for me. My name is Micol Levi-Menzi. I am the training director for the Alaska VA healthcare system. I am also a product of VA training. I interned at the Miami VA many moons ago, and since then have worked at Miami VA, Las Vegas VA, and now Alaska VA. I've held a bunch of different hats, which I think is one of the cool things about being in VA is that you get to do many different things. You're not just kind of stuck in one role for the entirety of your career. You get to do a lot of really cool things. I've gone to Veterans Court for veterans. I've run an outpatient program. My other hat right now is I am the veteran care coordinator for LGBTQ+ veterans. So aside from being training director, that's another thing that I do. So I'm excited to talk to you guys. I love VA training. So I think we're going back to, Dr. Proctor-Weber, right?
Yep.
All right, cool. I'll mute myself.
Thank you. We're going to try and make this interactive. So what I was thinking was we have a couple topics that each of us feel very passionate about that we would like to speak to. And then maybe between each topic, we can open it up to questions. And then again, at the end of the discussion. Sound good? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to start us off with VA culture. And I want to talk about the VA as a cultural institution. The VA is a huge government-run healthcare organization. And we're also very mission-driven. The principal mission, of course, is to provide healthcare to the nation's veterans. But we also focus on the mission of research and training the next generation of VA healthcare providers. That's where the internship and postdocs come in. So to succeed here, you just need to decide if, one, you're interested in working in a healthcare medical environment, and two, are you interested in learning and supporting veteran perspectives and values? The veteran perspective is critical to your work in this healthcare organization. Their service is very important to their identity, and this can have both negative and positive aspects to how they engage in not only their medical health care, but their mental health care. So many trainees have actually not had a lot of interaction with veterans or even military culture before internship, and that's okay. You do not need to be a veteran or have any VA experience to apply for a VA internship. These things will be fine as long as you show interest, respect, and mostly just a willingness to learn about veterans and what's important to them. And then you're going to incorporate that into your mental health care VA training programs across the board are going to provide you with what you need to know about military culture, and they're going to give you the support to learn and thrive in this environment. I think another thing that's important to point out is the VA is a pretty large bureaucracy. So working in a large, everyone's nodding their head, working in a large bureaucracy really requires flexibility and patience. Some things don't make sense at first, which can be really frustrating as a frontline healthcare provider. But what we learn is that a surprising number of policies turn out to be the very best options for a complicated scenario. And your training director and your training supervisors, they're going to help you navigate all of the VA bureaucracy's rules and guidelines. As an incoming intern, we really respect those that have diligence, reliability, accountability. These types of aspects to your professional career are important. So this should be part of your skill set. You'll be expected to follow through with basic clinical and educational responsibilities. But we keep in mind that we are also being supported by US taxpayers. And as such, you're probably going to have more formal accountability than maybe you've been used to in other practica settings. There are many, many layers of oversight within the VA. VA is a highly visible organization. Americans feel pretty strongly about supporting veterans, but sometimes Americans are in disagreement about the merits of particular military actions or even the role of government in healthcare. So sometimes the VA can be quite the lightning rod in terms of interest, and sometimes there's a heightened level of scrutiny on our healthcare organization politically. That's not something that you're going to see in your kind of civilian medical organizations. But as an intern and as an employee, if you stay focused on your care and you stay professional, you're going to be free from too much distraction related to these external factors. So I really encourage you to give some of these things a little bit of thought before applying and interviewing. What we like to see as training directors is a willingness to engage in this culture just through your actions, your applications, and if you interview with us, just through your respect of veteran culture. So we do offer great opportunities within the VA and just a fantastic work environment. And if you want to be a VA intern, you should probably understand that there is quite a bit of variability between different VA hospitals and different VA training programs. So aside from the obvious, many different geographic locations, you can choose VAs on the beach, you can choose VAs in the mountains, you can choose Midwest VAs, big city VAs, lovely rural VAs, lots of different options for all kinds of personalities and career goals. But in addition to that, it's also important to understand that each internship really functions as an independent program with its own accreditation, its own policies, and its own training experiences. So Micol and Joanna are going to talk to you about the similarities between training programs. We all are all VA after all, but I do want to make sure that you're aware of the variability as well. To start with, VA hospitals differ in terms of their overall size and complexity, and that is going to influence the size of your training cohort. How many interns or how many trainees are at any particular hospital. It's also going to influence the number of training supervisors that you have access to, as well as just the different types of clinical rotations that each facility offers. As you start to investigate and do your research with the UPPD and start putting forth your applications, I would really encourage you to take a good look at each program's brochure. Through the UPPD, the APIC directory, you're going to have a direct link to any of these programs that you're interested in. But you want to pay attention to the specific offerings at any particular location to make sure that it lines up with your interests as well as your overall career goals. Where I like to tell people to start is, outside of geographic location and what kind of weather you can tolerate. Do you like the clinical rotations that are offered? Do you prefer big, complex and diverse medical settings with, 15 different rotation options and a large training staff? Or do you really want something more intimate, something where you can build really close mentor-like relationships? And maybe you haven't worked at a hospital yet, so you don't know the answer to that question. That's okay too. Another thing to think about is, do you want to have an emphasis or a specialty during internship training? Some of the emphasis areas that I'm familiar with are neuropsychology, geropsychology, health psychology, or alternatively, would you prefer a more generalist training? Generalist trainings are going to set you up where you can employ just about anywhere you want to after graduation. And then what about research? Is conducting research in your career plan? Well, that's something you'll want to pay attention to. Some VAs have really robust research training, research support, and other types of programs really don't use that as an emphasis area. Going through the brochures and just making a checklist of things that stand out to you, things that feel like they're a good fit for what you want to accomplish, is going to be one of your first steps in the application process. Then, once you get through that and the interviews start coming in, you're going to want to make sure that you can speak to the specific program that you applied to. We're not all the same. And the training director, and I can speak personally on this, is really going to expect and want you to be familiar with their specific program. I'd like you to know what Bay Pines, for example, offers and doesn't offer. As a general strategy, what I would suggest that you avoid is asking a training director during your interview if they offer something that wasn't mentioned anywhere in the brochure. We're looking for fit just like you are. We want someone who's going to come to our program and really take advantage of what we have to offer, what's available at our site. We start getting nervous when applicants begin to ask for something that the program doesn't actually offer. So I think before I hand this off to Dr. McCormick, who's going to talk about what's unique about training within the VA, I want to see if there are any questions. We can also hold these until the end.
I do not yet see any in the chat.
All right.
Or in the Q&A.
Well, then we have a lot more information that we'd like to share with you. Okay, Joanna, are you up next?
I was just checking to see if there's any questions yet. So. Well, I'll tell you some of the unique things about the VA. And what I can say is that one of the reasons why I didn't apply for a VA internship when I was looking for internship was because I had never worked with veterans before. We didn't have a practicum where I was going to school, even though I had a lot of extensive training in PTSD. And so it surprised me that when they hired me and we were still a good fit. So my different experiences also can fit nicely, even if you hadn't had VA experience. And so some of the unique things is that there's a commitment to both education and training in the VA. So long history in the VA of providing training. In fact, the most psychologists as a group in the country do have had some experience to working in the VA across their lifetime. So whether it's a practicum, postdoc, internship, There's a core pillar of our mission, not only to offer the best care to veterans, but also to grow our staff and our trainees at being familiar with the best practices. And so within that, we have unique funding that can focus on education and training rather than just depending on billable hours, which can sometimes occur at other hospitals. The provision of supervision, so your supervisor, rotation supervisors, that's seen as a benefit and a privilege as a part of their employment. So it's not a tacked on duty. It is something that training programs work really hard to match strong supervisors with their trainees. In addition to that, we have an experience with evidence-based practice, measurement-based care. Science drives our care in making those decisions. There's a number of evidence-based psychotherapies within a range of presentations, and that's what you might look for in the brochure of the programs of what do they have to offer. Would the supervisor be able to supervise you in providing clinical care in a particular EBP? Things like PTSD, motivational interviewing, substance use, also health psychology, including chronic pain or insomnia, a variety of things, including couples work and occasionally family work. So a tremendous amount of resources are spent in training the supervisors and practitioners for those that work in the VA setting so that they can be certified provider and also supervise trainees well. And so that we can have a variety of options to give veterans when they're seeking particular types of care. So each training program might have a cluster of different types of things, different rotations that you can experience, more than one. Might be health, might be PCMHI, which would be attached to our medical primary care units. And so a variety of different levels of both measurement-based care, but also EVPs as they would be appropriate to that setting. And so trainees benefit because many times their training program will also have certified trainers of those particular clinical interventions at their setting. There's also the diversity of different types of clinical experiences. So you could have inpatient, outpatient services in mental health, be recovery focused, working with homeless, suicide prevention, again, a specialty clinic such as a pain clinic or sleep clinic, or working with the primary care office and the different PAC teams that might be available. So there's different ways to embed your experiences. And I think most programs try to offer a variety of things so you have more than one. You may have that specialty area that you're super excited about, and then some growing areas so that you can have a variety and get used to working with a variety of different providers, whether it's social work, nursing, primary care, specialists, and so forth, that you're working as a team. There's also quite a bit of training to work with underserved populations. So veterans typically do not have the resources. If they're using VA services, they're often using this because of a variety of needs where it's maybe difficult to get healthcare elsewhere. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that not all veterans are enrolled in VA healthcare. And so we're actually seeing a population that qualifies for VA healthcare and may have greater needs than what might be available to them. We work well with an interdisciplinary, so medical records and so forth, so we can frequently collaborate well as a team. And so we'll get a range of those experiences for serving our veterans that need the care that we have to offer. You also get exposure to a variety of different roles of a psychologist. So I think you've heard from a couple here that not only are they the training director, but they may work in different types of clinics or different leadership roles. And so that's a great way to see how someone as a psychologist can, through their lifespan working in the VA, have different roles, different clinics. It's perfectly acceptable and encouraged sometimes to go and work in different clinics so that you have the experience, but also to prevent burnout. You have a new experience to grow in a leadership role. And so that's a neat thing to see and have exposure to as a trainee. The pipeline for working in the VA is something that if you work in an internship through the VA, you are tied into opportunities, multiple opportunities for either postdoc or future employment. So there's different avenues. And I know that in my training program, sometimes people go to a different setting, but will come back for once they're licensed to work at our VA. So it's a great way to interview at different VA settings, get some exposure to their teams and that culture, and then try one. And you can always go to other VAs well. You're well trained, and it's beneficial to be trained in the VA in that sense. There's also the last piece that I think is great is stable funding for VA and postdocs, for internship and postdocs, which is wonderful. So again, it's not tied to billing, it's tied through Congress, and there's a set amount of money that's planned way in the future to be able to have that funding source go to our training programs. And so that's a very nice benefit to have that stable from year to year to allow that consistency in training. So those are some of the things that are unique. Any questions that I could answer?
We do have one question in the chat. How strict is the hours requirement listed on the site's intake entry? Specific to Bay Pines, I know there is 150 hours of assessment and 500 total hours. Due to COVID limiting training site availability, I have the 500 hours overall, but not 150. Is that being taken into consideration, or are those hard numbers that must be met?
Want to field this one? I think I was outed with my high numbers. Micol's laughing at me. So as far as experience goes, we need you to come in with some experience. The expectation is that you have probably been in at least one, if not two, different practica settings. You know, our medical facilities are complex. We deal with pretty complicated comorbidities, mental illness, you know, in the presence of significant medical illness, aging effects. But when it comes down to the magic number, there isn't a magic number. You guys have been living the practica experience. You know that sometimes quantity is not quality. We will typically look at a range. The APIC directory does ask us to put in a number. You know, we've got to start somewhere. We're not going to probably match with someone who has 0 practica hours. But that also doesn't mean that you need 1,000 practica hours. My suggestion, if you feel that your hours aren't quite where they need to be, is to reach out to the training director. We love hearing from you guys. Let us know what it is that you've done and maybe what you have planned for the next few months. You know, when you make application, you're often still, you know, collecting clinical hours. Like those count, even if they're not on your API. Let us know and just really speak to, you know, the quality of the experiences that you've had. I would prefer to match with a trainee who had 200 hours of really heavily supervised clinical experience than 1,200 of exposure, where all they did was observe. Those things aren't equal to me, but bottom line, just reach out to the training director. They will definitely get back to you and ask your questions about the hours.
Thank you. We have one more question that was placed in the chat about application approaches. How much should we demonstrate an understanding of veteran culture, et cetera, in our cover letter versus demonstrate understanding and willingness to learn in the interview?
I'll add to that, and then Micol, if you can. I think it's different, but I would say generally, the more you can share about yourself or feel comfortable disclosing, understanding veteran culture. For example, I am not a veteran, but I have veteran family members, and there's some things, but I can't know everything. And so there's a willingness to share why are you interested in working with veterans. I would say that's helpful. But our cover letters are also really helpful for you to really describe yourself. We read your essays and so forth, but sometimes they can sound the same across, you know, when we're reading 100 of them. So if you could describe yourself and what you're passionate about or what you're interested in. And sometimes there's research that you're passionate about, or there's different experiences. If you feel comfortable sharing more, please do, because there's going to be gaps, as there would be for anyone, and we can help fill that. It also might help with matching, are we a good place so for you? So sometimes we may not have enough supervisors or different things to be able to help someone get to where they need to be by the end of internship. Like, how much do we need? So you don't need to be a perfect fit, but how much time and energy are we the best fit for what you want to do in your training year? Dr. Levi-Menzi.
I agree with everything you said. I came into the VA with no VA experience, and I know veterans in my family. I mean, my husband's a veteran now, but I didn't know him when I was applying for internship. So I think for me, it's the understanding and willingness to learn new things. I think that is incredibly vital for anybody to share and to really demonstrate, especially during interviews. We might ask a question where you might really not know, and that's okay, but maybe walk us through how you would think through this problem, walk us through how you would get help and consult. And it's okay to not know everything. I'm 12 years in, I still have no idea what I'm doing half the time. Just kidding. I think I have a pretty good idea, but there are things I don't know a lot about. And so it's knowing how to get that information and access help is super important. I thought I saw someone typing another question, but I don't think so. I'm going to jump into the diversity angle unless either one of you guys had more to say about that specific question. No? Okay, cool. So I am here to talk to you about diversity within VA, and this topic makes me very happy and excited to talk about. Like I shared a minute ago, I applied to VA with no VA experience and no veterans in my family. I really didn't know what I was getting into. And in my head, and I think the common preconceived notion is that VA patients are a pretty homogenous group of primarily older Caucasian men. I think that tends to be a lot of what people think. And the truth could not be any more different than that. VA serves an incredibly wide range of ages. Some of veterans are still in their young 20s. We have women veterans, varied ethnic groups, ability groups. There's tons of diversity within sexual orientation and identification. It's a very rich population. If there is a specific niche that you're thinking in your head, oh, I've never worked with XYZ patient, and you tell your supervisor, odds are by the end of the year, you're going to have that ability presented to you. One of the really cool things about working in VA and now as a training director in VA, gosh, this is my 6th year as a TD. Yeah, and maybe 8th year within training leadership. I was an assistant training director before then. So it's been a little bit. We do have shared resources as training directors, and that I think makes our organization and our training incredibly strong. I think, ladies, do you remember the exact amount of training directors that we have? It was shared in a call recently, and now I can't remember.
It was upwards of 300 or 400, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty intense amount. Thank you. And so you would think that, oh gosh, that's a lot of people. You guys probably don't all know each other. I may not have met everybody, but I guarantee you that on our listserv, there are questions flying back and forth all the time. And we have a SharePoint where we share resources. We've interacted via either a Teams chat or a national call or an email with almost a good chunk of that 300 to 400 different people. There's sometimes we go to national meetings and I meet someone in person. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so great to finally meet you. We tag teamed on XYZ project a few years ago. So the shared resources and the amount of other folks for training directors to lean on benefits you guys as trainees, because it just makes our pool of resources and things that we can teach you so much richer. The other piece, oops, I just had a pop-up. I apologize. Our medical record system likes to pop up in the most inopportune of times, and that's what just happened. I apologize. We do serve a very diverse population. like I said, in terms of age, ethnicity, ability, military culture, even within the military culture, the different branches have their own kind of specific culture. We serve veterans from a variety of social economic status, LGBTQ status, gender. We've got rural populations via telemental health offerings. That's something that Alaska really prides itself on. We've got veterans who are in extremely remote locations, only accessible by seaplane. And so they can't come into the VA for appointments. And so we're doing a lot of telehealth pieces. We also serve tribal populations in Alaska, which is another cool thing. And I know I'm tooting the Alaska horn a little bit loudly. Sorry, guys. So even within VA, there's a lot of diversity. I want to share a little 30-second story about my own experience with diverse populations within VA. So I went to school in South Florida, maxed at the Miami VA, was really excited. I thought, okay, I have no idea what I'm doing. I felt like I was standing at the top of a mountain wearing roller skates on day one, and I was just going to let go and see where the trip took me. And I had such a great experience. It actually changed the entire trajectory of my career personally with specific respect to diversity. One of my long-term psychotherapy cases had finished. I went to my training director and I said, okay, I need a new case. She gives me information. I go to the veterans chart. I read that they're a transgender veteran. And I went back to my training director and I said, okay, I don't think I'm the right person here. I have never worked with a trans person. I am not going to do this person a good service. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is so new to me. And she goes, great, let's dig in. And so I ended up went to symposium that the VA funded. I did tons of consultation with local resources, surgeons, and other folks who had a special emphasis in that area. Did tons of research with the local library within the VA system. I really dove head into it. If you heard me at the beginning of the call, one of the other hats I wear now is the LGBTQ coordinator. That only came about because of that one veteran that I saw on internship. That one veteran truly changed the way I saw the world and very much impacted what I wanted to do. I was opened up to another level of diversity that I really had no exposure to. And I thought, I'm not good enough to work with this person. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm gonna screw something up. I learned, and I had great training resources that really helped shape how I worked with that one person, but then also how I saw my career going. So, little personal story to really share with you that the diversity within VA is immense. And if you really go into the experience ready to have all the different opportunities opened up to you and saying, yes, I want to try. And that kind of goes back to Lindsay Nichols's question. Yeah, a willingness and an openness to learn and try new things is going to serve you really well within VA, because you're going to really just sit at a table full of these diverse, opportunities, and you can take advantage of them. Getting back to what I'm supposed to be talking about, not my own little story. The other things I wanted to mention is that within VA, we have access to, and you guys will have access to, a bunch of national resources. There is a national diversity listserv where staff and trainees can ask questions and share resources specifically related to diversity topics. There are monthly diversity and inclusion forums, and then there are quarterly diversity consultation calls. There's also several national SharePoint sites where you guys can look at resources that are VA nationwide. There's training modules, there's articles. If you wanted to start a diversity committee, although I'd be surprised if there wasn't already one, but let's say you really wanted to do something specific, there's information on how to do that. There's experiential exercises. There's tons of resources available VA nationwide. I also want to say that I think Dr. McCormick said this at one point, once you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA. And that could not be more true also when it comes to diversity training. Some VAs will have specific rotations where you as trainees will go through the rotation and have a focus on diversity there. Other VAs may use it as a seminar. So you might have diversity seminar weekly, bi-weekly, whatever it may be. So the way diversity is worked into the training program might differ. I'd encourage you guys, when you go on interviews and when you read those manuals that Dr. Proctor-Weber was mentioning, really look at that and see, okay, is this how I envision my diversity training going? Is this what I want? Is this overload? Maybe I don't necessarily want to be in a rotation, for 6 months, or maybe this is just the right amount. So take a look at that and reach out to the training directors and ask them. I do know that some sites also offer diversity outings. When we did orientation 2 weeks ago, we actually went to several really cool local diversity establishments in the Anchorage area. We went to the Alaska Heritage Museum, spent half a day there, really so that we could immerse our interns into what it is like to be in Alaska, what Native Alaskan culture is, because it's a very specific thing. And so different VAs might take you on different outings. I don't know, Dr. Proctor-Weber and Dr. McCormick, if you guys do, but I have a feeling you probably might. And so take a look at those, because they're really cool pieces to add on to the training bit. If I could offer one piece of advice on how to approach diversity within your applications and within your interviews, talk about your own cultural variables. Talk about how those impact your thinking and how it impacts your work with your clients, veterans, patients, whatever word you want to use. Talk about your own stimulus value. Don't be afraid to incorporate that into your interview responses or your essays on your application. Be prepared to talk about cultural factors with respect to a case or some professional interactions. Again, you're not just talking about the cultural factors of your patient or client, but of your own stimulus value and how that impacts that interaction that you had. So we're really looking at self-awareness as an important component of cultural sensitivity, knowing what you know, but also knowing what you don't know. Kind of like when I walked into my TD's office and said, I have no idea what I'm doing with this veteran, please help. That really, I love when an intern can come to me and say, I am knee deep in this and I have no idea what I'm doing, please help me. Great, that's my job, let me do it, let me help you, let's get there. So that's the diversity piece. I tend to talk a little bit faster than my two colleagues, so I apologize if I raced through that. Any questions about that or VA in general? We are happy to field them. Oh yeah, so Division 18 definitely chimed in. Important to mention that the VA is the largest single employer of psychologists in the world with a network of over 6,000 psychologists. Absolutely. I'm going to build on that and say, if you're at a smaller site like Alaska, we're pretty tiny, small but mighty, I promise. If there is something that were to come up within your training year or clinically even for one of our staff, and we might not have a subject matter expert locally, because VA is so vast and big, but we're also still so connected, especially with teens, I can chat with someone so easily across the country and get immediate help on something. And so you might be training at a smaller facility or a massive facility, it doesn't matter, but you have access to the nationwide resources of VA. Stop talking.
Thank you. There is an additional question that was posted in the chat. Can you speak to recommendations by husband supervisors, faculty, et cetera, who are not familiar with the VA system?
I actually couldn't understand that.
Okay, were you just asking about recommendation letters from supervisors that are not VA? Did I understand that?
Not familiar with the VA system. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. If you've never worked in a VA, I don't think you're going to get a recommendation from a VA psychologist. What we're looking for in recommendation letters is someone who knows you, who can speak to your work, to your character, to your level of professionalism, kind of going back to, are you accountable and diligent and respectful? Do you seek out supervision? Are you a participant in your clinical training? We like to see a variety of references, maybe people who have interacted with you in different areas of your clinical training. So maybe some supervisors that were clinical, maybe a dissertation chair, someone who's been working on with you for a longer period of time, over many years on a project, that can kind of speak to some of those characteristics. Sometimes, when we're in graduate school, our recommendations come from faculty who we have TA'd for, and they can speak to, again, kind of our accountability and professionalism with respect to, our relationship with them and our work for them and our work with the trainees that we have TA'd for. So you can have a broad sort of reach of different recommendations, but I would suggest at least one be clinical. I know that if I received an application and there were no clinical references, I'd be a little concerned that either you hadn't had any clinical experiences, or really hadn't been able to find somebody who could sort of support you and provide a recommendation for you, since most of the work that we do is clinical in nature. Anything to add on that, Micol or Joanna?
I'd just say get recommendation letters from people who are going to actually write you a good one. I've seen recommendation letters that are, you can almost see that they're like a stock writing. Get some, try to ask and make sure that this is a person who you actually have a connection with, if possible, so that there's a letter in there that really speaks to you as a human. Joanna, did you answer the rotation one? Is that why it disappeared? There was a question that disappeared. I don't know where it went. There was a question somewhere about rotation length. I just want to chime in and say that is completely dependent on specific sites. Some rotations are, I think, 3 or 4 months. Some are 6 months. Some are fully 12 months. But I would check each brochure carefully to see exactly what the offerings are, which I don't know if that's what you wrote, Joanna.
I want to add one quick thing to that too. I don't know what made me think of it, Micol, but I remember being really nervous when I was applying for internship because I wanted to work in a medical hospital. At the time, I had never been a VA, so I didn't know that that's what I wanted. And I felt this weird pressure, I don't know where it came from, that I had to already know all the things. I had to already have done all the things in order to be like a good candidate or a good fit. And the reality is if I knew all the things, nobody would want me, because what do they possibly have to offer to me? So striking a balance, within your application materials, your cover letter of, hey, here's some of the skills that I've already developed, but this is what your site can offer. That's very attractive to a training director, because I look at these cover letters, these applications, and I say, hey, this person has never worked with someone who is experiencing PTSD, but they want to. And guess what I can offer? I can offer like 4 rotations specifically for PTSD work and all the different evidence-based treatments. So just keep in mind that, when you're filling these things out, that it is okay to be open about what the site has that you have not been exposed to yet. We really don't expect you to come in completely trained and ready to launch into your career. We want to help you make that journey.
I'm going to build off of that, actually. Oh, sorry, Joanna, go ahead.
I'll just add to the question about there's research recommendation. Ideally, clinical work, we need to have enough letters about your clinical work, but I've worked with some trainees who were great, who their dissertation was on PTSD or moral injury or something that was applicable. Sometimes your dissertation might be an area that you may not have had a lot of clinical experience with, but you come really well prepared. You might have great foundational experiences clinically, and then a dissertation that's specific to something that we would be interested in working in the VA. And so the trainee applicant put a really good letter together that explained, this is what I'm interested, passionate, this is what I understand, I need the next level clinically. And that was a great way to, and they were a great trainee. So different ways to highlight your dissertation doesn't have to match the VA, but does your clinical experiences match something? Does your district, something that's the package? Why are you coming to the VA or interested in applying? I think you could build your case that would really highlight your strengths nicely. I think there's a question about neuropsych internship too. So,
I'm going to say one last thing about this topic specifically. I think there is a tendency at the interview stage to kind of go in there and kind of like Zoe was saying, just, I know all the things. I've done all these things and look how great I am. Yes, of course, we want to know how great you are and all the things that you've done. Absolutely share these things. But there's a point during our facilities rank day where we talk about, is this person teachable? Is this person someone who wants to be trained, wants to learn? And so don't be afraid to not know everything and to actually tell us, like, yeah, that's not a thing I really know. Kind of looking to you guys to teach me. That's something that we really, really do have conversations about. And so I just saw cameras pop on. I'll be quiet now. I think that's my cue to be quiet.
No, it's all great discussion. Just here to do a time check because we've got about 5 minutes left, and I see we may still have some questions that are unanswered. So I wanted to see if there's some that we want to prioritize with the last few minutes that we have left. I think I see a couple here regarding neuropsych internships and VA applications being similar on the APIC, or is it all the same? That sounds like an important one.
I can talk about that one. I'm a neuropsychologist, so I know a lot about neuropsychology. This is where you'll want to review the brochures. If the brochures offer rotations in neuropsychology, or if the program offers an APIC track in neuropsychology, you can rest assured that you will get training in neuropsych. Tracks tend to be a little more competitive. But what the tracks will guarantee is usually a substantive portion of your training within neuropsychology to set you up relatively well for postdoc. But even if they only offer a rotation, again, a question you can reach out to the training director, is your training in neuropsychology enough for me to continue on my journey for specialization?
Thanks. We've got another one on here that says, do your recommendations have to all be from psychologists, or can it be from people that have known you in different capacities for multiple years that can still speak to your work ethic and your character?
That's a great question. I don't know that I've ever received a recommendation from an applicant that sent one in that wasn't from a psychologist. I think that this could be a nice additional recommendation, kind of a character witness. If it's someone who knows your work in another area. Here's an example. What if you were a clinical social worker or a mental health counselor prior to going to graduate school? Well, that's relevant. That could be a, many year career in the field of mental health. I'd love to hear from a reference in that area. So that would be one example.
Yeah, or if you volunteered at a community crisis center or something like that, where maybe not everybody has on staff psychologists, I think that would be a good consideration. I'll answer the last two just briefly because I know we'll be running short on time. So Juliana had asked, is it too soon to ask for tips of what to do after internship in order to kind of really start gearing yourself up towards a VA career? Julie, I'm gonna ask you to put a bookmark on it because on November 6th, we actually will be hosting another one of these, but for VA postdocs. And usually as part of that discussion, we kind of talk about VA postdoc versus entering a VA, full-time position. And actually, Dr. Zoe Proctor-Weber, who's here right here with us, will also be on that panel. So I would encourage you to come back here in a couple of months. We'll certainly cover some of that information. And I did see one question in there about whether volunteering for professional organizations like Division 18 make you competitive. I will say that it's not too early to, invest in professional organizations. Again, it just kind of shows your investment in the field and your investment outside of clinical work. I think it's always important to be able to show, your skill sets being rounded out in a variety of ways. So thank you for joining us at the APA convention last week in DC. Was really good to have you there. Where to sign up? We'll actually be sending out an email here in the next couple of weeks with the flyer. Likely what brought you here was that flyer where we announced who would be presenting and when. So keep an eye out on that email, and it's going to include that Zoom registration link as well. So with the last couple of minutes, I'll hand it back to the panelists. Any closing thoughts that you have for our group today before we wrap up here today?
I'd like to just finish off with the VA is a fantastic environment. It's a great place to launch your career, and it's a great place to work and grow. We're invested in training interns and keeping them within our pipeline. VA offers really incredible benefits, both tangible and intangible, locations all over the country, diversity in your role, and plenty of leadership and advancement opportunities. So not just a great place to launch, but a great place to stay and thrive. Anything to add, Micol or Joanna?
I would just add, if you have a question about a specific site that you can't seem to find via the brochure or the manual, email that training director, reach out to them. We love to chat about our programs. We'll talk all night and day if you let us. So definitely reach out to us and let us help you get clarity on anything.
Yeah, it's not a bother to reach out and ask questions. It's not. It's good that you're looking for fit. So you don't need to, but if you want to, it's welcome.
Thank you all. And just to add to what Dr. Proctor-Weber mentioned, it's not only the quality of the training, but also the quality of the healthcare that we provide. I did want to drop in a news article that dropped a couple of weeks ago this month, where the healthcare that's being provided within the VA healthcare system is compared to the private sector, and again, across the board. Really proud of the work that we're able to do and able to provide to our nation's veterans, and a big part of psychology being at the center of that. So lots to be proud of there as well, and you get to be a part of that. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Again, whether you choose a career in the VA or not, we're just really appreciative that you have chosen psychology to be your profession, to be able to give back to our communities. And hopefully you get to choose a career, whether in VA or public service. And just thank you for your time. And we wish you all the very best of luck on what we know is often a challenging and stressful time for you in your professional development and career. So don't feel afraid to reach out to us. We're here to support you. And thank you again for joining us here today.
Thank you.